Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Dr. Merritt Moore, Quantum Ballerina. She's a quantum physicist, professional ballerina, obtained a PhD in atomic laser physics from Oxford, and an outstanding ballet career coinciding with it. Was awarded Forbes 30 under 30, inspiration for women in STEM, future astronaut, and is creating a duet between human dancers and industrial robotic arm. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath PolyCast.
Thank you for having me, Dustin.
Like I always say too, like when I run out of air doing that intro, it makes me happy because it's one of those. This is a show by PolyInnovator, so please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hello, innovators.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath PolyCast. Well, the way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Oh, man.
That was not on the question, sorry.
I think, well, I think my friends know this about me, but in general, I'm quite an introvert compared to, I guess, what people would assume.
I think I had you pegged for an ambivert at one point, because I don't know if it was one of the interviews that I saw or something like that. How do you feel about, like, introversion versus extroversion? Because you're always soft-spoken, you didn't talk too much when you're younger, which makes sense for being an introvert, but you also have this like expressive personality and have so much going on, so I was just curious about that.
So maybe, yeah, more truthfully, it is the ambivert, where I gain energy by being on my own and just listening to an audiobook and stretching for hours. That's how I rev up my energy. Mm-hmm. And then I have the energy to be extroverted, and if I hang out with friends, like I want a big party or something, but definitely to gain energy. And so majority of my time, probably 95% of my time is on my own.
Definitely introverted. That's super cool. And it's always interesting too, because some of my greatest friends in life have been introverts. And it's just one of those things where seeing how they might pick up energy versus my more extroverted friends has always been fascinating for me, because sometimes just being on your own is really important. I think a lot of extroverts need to do that, but a lot of introverts also need to come out of their shell, so having a balance is always great too.
Yeah, for sure, balance. But yeah, so this lockdown, I've been like, we're all one thing. I'm like, woe is me, I have to do my favorite thing.
Oh no. There was a ton of TikToks that was like that. Like at the beginning of quarantine, there was a whole bunch of introverts on TikTok going like, oh no, I can't see you because of the pandemic. And it's like, they're all just having a blast, whereas like 2 days in, the extroverts are going crazy. Yeah. What was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you evolved since then?
Mindset. So, well, it's hard to look back because I'm like, oh, I was so clever back then, or dumb, right? Without really remembering the full picture of it. But I think mindset has stayed similar to 5 years ago in terms of, the being conscientious and aware of what my priorities are and focusing on them. I would say my priorities have certainly changed a bit. But I think mindset was super intense in college, and then in grad school. Yeah, so 5 years ago, I was still in grad school. But it became, a little bit different. I'm trying to be like, oh, how can I be more specific about what my mindset was?
Right.
Yeah.
You were, there was a lot of interviews that were from a while back, and when I saw a lot of them too, it was interesting just how gung-ho you were at getting things done, and you would wake up super early to start your stretches and then go into the lab and stuff like that. It's like, man, I don't know how she has the energy to do that, because I was even thinking, just like from a personal trainer's perspective, like how does she have the energy to get up that early, get all the stuff done, have a mental work day for 10 hours straight, and then go home and keep practicing and doing other stuff too.
I definitely worked a lot, very tired. So I think that, that has changed a bit, of where I thought I was being most productive and like accomplished if I was still pushing through, like super tired. And now I'm like, oh, actually, if I do it really intensely for 3 hours, I can just do it super intensely for 3 hours, like with all my energy, rather than for 10 hours at 20% like energy capacity. So strategy in terms of pursuing things has perhaps changed. And in that sense of how I'm doing things, where mindset is like, still want to push to the mat, like get the results, But if being experimentalist and being like, okay, am I going to do it 20% energy for 10 hours or 100% at 3 hours? Okay, let's be smart about this.
It's a matter of efficiency at that point.
Yeah.
More
And just,
deliberate deep work.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's something
Love
I
that.
learned, yeah.
Well,
Over
and it makes
time.
me think of like exercises too, because there was at one point, I don't know why, but I worked out for 3 hours. Like actually worked out for 3 hours just straight. And it's one of those things where it's like, why? Why did I do that? Well, I wanted to push myself for one, but also two, just you can do most of that stuff in 45 minutes if you do it fast enough, and if you do it like more intensely. It's like, okay, I just need to tone that down. You don't need to be going for a couple hours. You need to go for like a hot minute and get it done.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really hard balance. That's one that I'm constantly trying to figure out, is that balance of pushing yourself to the limit to improve, but also, it's that balance of it is like, is this lazy or am I being smart? Pushing yourself to that limit so that you're growing, but also making sure you're not overdoing it. But I think sometimes we think we're overdoing it, but actually we're not. So it's a really
Yeah.
tricky balance. So for me, it's very much finding in ballet coaches who I trust, who can push me to a limit that I never thought was possible, but know exactly when to stop me from overdoing it, because I've definitely overdone it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
it's
almost like
such a
ballet too. You don't want to overdo it.
no, you get injuries. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I personal train people, and I was trying to get my roommate to do push-ups, and it's one of those things where I was trying to get him to do one more rep, and like in my head, I know he can do one more rep. It might take us 30 minutes to get that last rep because he was doing so much already at that point. Physically speaking, he
Yeah.
was kicking butt and doing it. But like, there's a certain level of grit involved that you have to actually push yourself past. You know this. I've seen like you do that kind of thing, and it's one of those things where being able to push past that often comes internally, but a good coach will know when it is a level of grit versus when it's actually burning your muscles and getting too much lactic acid and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, that's why I'm so thankful for the mentors that I have found. And I'm a bit picky. Like I think there are only few in the world that I have found where I was like, okay, they're the real deal.
Yeah.
I trust them completely, and they will push me to levels that where I had tears coming down my face. I was emotionally happy, so I don't talk about it
Right.
often because people are like, oh my God, she's so weird. But emotionally, I knew I was getting better, but physically, it was incredibly difficult.
Well, I think the level of exercise that you do, if you get to a certain high level, high tier, it affects the other pillars of your life, the other aspects of your life, including spirituality, including emotions, including the mental state as well. And if you get to the point where you're doing so much exercise, it will break you down emotionally. You have to have that resilience because that's what makes you do more physically.
Yeah. And it's that, and what's nice about that is like once you've pushed to that limit, to a limit that you thought was never possible, you reassess everything. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I thought that was really not possible, but actually it was. So we now have to reassess everything that I think is impossible. And, it puts things in perspective where, things that might upset oneself or one might find difficult in comparison to a really hard training. Like, we're not going to complain about that.
Yeah.
I know what really grueling is, and this isn't
Well,
it.
yeah, it makes me think of like the Shaolin monks too, where there's this. I saw this video of literally a whole bunch of them running up a mountain, like on the stairs of a mountain, just busting their like all the way up, and then they go down bear crawl all the way down, like on the all fours, crawling down the stairs of the mountain, and then they go back and do it again, and it's just like. That's grueling. Like if you see stuff, and the
Yeah.
ballerinas too. Like just practicing could break the toes. It can break. You can
Yeah.
bleed, and all these different pains. Obviously, you know way more than me about it. But like that's what my limited knowledge knows about. It's like that sounds painful. That sounds horrible. But it's probably necessary in order to grow and pass and get stronger.
Yeah, and going to those limits, I think it just increases that appreciation for everything else. When you're really pushed to the limit, you're like, oh, like roof over my head, food and hot water is amazing. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Well, and before I ask the next question too, it makes me think of like Diogenes over an old philosopher where he talks about like he only ate when he was absolutely starving. He only drank when he was dying of thirst, and because of that, the dirtiest of water tasted like the greatest wine on earth, and
Mm-hmm.
the food you could have just a piece of bread and it'll taste like a feast, and it's like the
Yeah,
perspective you have. Yeah.
yeah. I
Well,
mean,
speaking of like trainers around the world, like you mentioned, right? What was it like training in Italy through so much of your formative years?
well, that was actually 1 year,
Oh,
and and so I was 15, going to school in high school in LA, and I had started ballet at 13, and at that point I was ready to quit dance. I was like, tried it. Everyone's, there's this perfect ideal in dance that, like the perfect body and like there's this ideal that everyone's striving for. And I was just like, I'm finding this boring. I do not like it. This is okay. I'm quitting dance. And I was in this very academic high school where I was like, you know what? I don't know. Everyone's like we're all sheep chasing after the same thing. I was just like, I'm done. Like I'm doing a school year abroad in Italy. Peace.
yeah.
So I went to Italy actually to stop dancing, and I went to this tiny town called Viterbo, which is an hour north of Rome, with this program called School Year Abroad. And so you go live with an Italian family, but you take American classes there, and you're with a cohort of about 60 people. And yeah, looked up the town on Google, was like, does Viterbo have dance? And Google was like, no. I was like, great, I'm going, right? Like, I don't want to be tempted by it then. And I go there, and I went to the the gym, or like it was like okay, it was called the OK Pius or something like that. And down in the basement, there was this woman who was teaching a dance class, and it was like the dungiest gym ever. And she was commuting an hour and a half from Rome to teach this class because the teacher that used to teach it was sick, and so she was there helping out the students. And she was with this Romanian teacher, and I was like, I'm not taking a dance class. And then I was like, okay, just one.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I started training with her, and it was absolutely amazing. And so I would go and train in Rome and stay with her every weekend. We'd wake up at 6 a.m. We'd go take a professional class, and then she would train me for another 2 hours after that. I would take an hour break for lunch, and then she would train me another, up until midnight off the radiator in Rome. And it was, she just invested everything, and it was absolutely amazing.
Totally
So
immersion there,
finding,
huh?
yeah. And then I went back every year for the next 6 years to train with her during my winter break, during summer break, during like every break I could possibly get. And I was like sleeping on her kitchen floor, by the way. Like
Yeah.
it was like
That's crazy.
so intense, and she was ruthless, but with so much care. I would not be where I am right now without her. So yeah.
That sounds amazing. And just the level of immersion there and the push to get to a new level and having that great coach
Yeah.
being able to push you past the breaking points. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And like you always say on a lot of other shows, like you started at a late age, 13, which to me still seems really young. Like I
Yeah.
get, but like in the ballerina world, you probably want to start younger. Just like with learning piano, for example, you want to start when you're prime. But like this is there's a notion that you had missed out, but I think you've proven that to be false from what I've seen from all this here. There's a benefit from starting young, sure, but I think with dedication and deliberate practice, mastery can come too, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. I think, and I'm so glad I started later for me because it gave me that drive and slight, like constant slight panic of like, oh my God, I need to take, every single minute counts. And that just like, I've missed, back then, like 7 years that I could have been training. Every minute of every day counts, if I'm going to catch up. And so it just put the fire underneath my butt, right? Like I was like constantly on
Let's
this,
go.
like, let's go. And
Energizer Bunny.
yeah. And it was this, just thinking backwards, being like, okay, if that's where I wanted to get to, how am I going to make it possible? in this limited amount of time. And it just put the fire underneath my butt, and I was like, let's go.
Well, and I think a lot of the reason why people talk about doing it so young is that there's a still ideal of getting to 10,000 hours. Malcolm Gladwell popularized that idea, but he talked to David Epstein, who wrote the book Range, which talks about generalists and why they are thriving. And it's interesting how in that book, generalists can oftentimes become a master in an area because of the 8 to 12,000 kind of ratio, where depending on deliberate practice or how well you practice, who teaches you, and all these other factors, 10,000 might actually only be 8,000, maybe even 7,000 if you're really pushing it, really doing well. And so it's interesting that mastery can come from a wide range of factors. And we've always been kind of thinking like it's only 10,000 hours, but with a fire under your butt, like you're saying there, and like good teachers, you can get there a lot faster. But also too, generalists have that cross-disciplinary mindset. And so it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, But I had read that Malcolm book. And so in my head, I was aiming for 10,000 hours. So with the fire underneath my butt, I was like, I started late. We're putting in those hours where we are putting it. If I need to do my calf raises as I'm brushing my teeth, we are putting in the hours then. Like
I've done that. Exactly.
We are going to make the 10,000 hours work.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with the 10,000 hours. It's just a matter of like having the perspective that it could be more. And Range only came out like a year or two ago, so I think Malcolm Gladwell's book was around when you were doing that stuff. But it's a good goal to have, and it's something to reach towards. It's something to strive towards too. But I just wanted to kind of mention that like it's interesting too because you were able to get into another field after that as well. And it makes me wonder, like, where are you going to be in 10 years from now if you're just going to have a third field? You know what I mean? Maybe there'll be... Actually, that probably leads into trying to become an astronaut, huh? That'd be a third field right there.
I hope so.
Well, and it's interesting, too. I have a lot of questions here. I want to draw attention to the physics side of you. So what about the puzzle of physics draws you to it?
I think just as a young kid... I loved puzzles. Like that was, I think my parents just threw me weird puzzles. You know, in the back of the car, my dad would be on business trips and we'd all go and they would just throw me puzzles and I could be occupied for hours, like very happily with them. But at like the age of 3, you know, like, you know, there were blocks, but I was just like, and then, my go-to happy place at like around age 10 was these 3D puzzles, and I put on a book on tape, and I mean, I was such like the things I got in trouble for was the way my parents were like, "We thought you were asleep. Like you woke up in the middle, or you got out of bed in the middle of the night to finish your puzzle. Like go to bed." I would stay up doing my puzzle. And so then, and I loved math. I loved like the crossing things out and putting things together. But I liked the practical aspect of physics. Like doing theory to things to infinity and things that I could never prove, like somehow didn't excite me as much as solving the mysteries of the universe, or even better, like solving mysteries of the universe and then using them in ways to like create new technology like quantum computers. And so that was like what got me hooked.
And laser physics and all that great stuff. Yeah, well, and it makes me think too, like, hold on, how old were you when you first solved the Rubik's Cube?
We definitely had the Rubik's Cube, but we also had these like wood blocks.
Oh, yeah, interlock and whatnot?
Yeah. And, I don't know.
That's so interesting. It just makes me think too, like just how your brain was, and I'm curious as a host here to like understand like how did your brain function in that way. And like I remember playing video games when I was younger, but like that was the only thing that really engrossed me for a long time like that. But like you were so passionate about puzzles, you would sit there and wake up and go play it.
Yeah, well, I think it was also, I mean, I lived in quite I didn't realize at the time. I mean, it was just like felt like I was like, isn't this how everyone else lives? But so my parents had deliberately had no TV in the house. They were very, like no Disney, no Barbie doll. Like there were certain things not in the house. So I think there was just no other distraction. So for me, entertainment was the audiobook. And then like using my hands to do things was like, and so then I would just do it for hours.
Yeah, well, and it's the most entertaining thing around, but on top of that too, it really is good for the mind. And the more you engage with it, the more entertaining it becomes.
I guess. I don't know. My mom, I'm looking back at my childhood, and it was like such a carefree childhood. But I look back and I'm like my mother was, she knew what she was doing. Like, as in like, she was sneaking. We'd have like the food placemats, and it'd be the periodic table. And she's just like, it's beautiful art,
Just
she was like, it
subliminally
matched
get
the
in your mind.
lamps, But actually, I was like, she just wanted to put things out there and never force us. It was like, if they're interested, they're interested. But she was like, I'm going to have all of that stuff available for them to look at constantly. So
That's awesome, though. I like that. Like, it makes me think like good parents and good teaching there. And it also, getting into the next question here, too, the beauty of how the quantum realm works, I'm sure, is a wonderful inspiration as well. How have any of your dances been influenced by your research?
a couple. So one, I think the first one, normally I keep dance and physics separate, but there was this opportunity which is called Dance Your PhD. So people should check it out. It is this competition, international competition where dorky scientists just dance about their PhD work. And some are hilarious and super funny and great. And so I was like, this is fantastic.
Yeah,
So we did a dance. So in the experiment in atomic and laser physics, my experiment in quantum optics was creating pairs of photons via a process called spontaneous parametric down conversion. And it's like a light shining into a crystal, and then pairs of entangled photons come out. So I was like, entangled photons? We're going to call this entangled. It's going to be this tango and like these two, between these two particles. But what was fascinating was it made me think about the process of spontaneous parametric down conversion in a very, like, it really thought about like what was going on when the laser hit the crystal and visualize it, which I hadn't been forced to do. I kind of got a vague, I was like, yeah, the laser goes into the crystal and then the photons create. And then there's this equation, the Hamiltonian, which kind of describes that process. And the equation is like this long, like if I could fit it in the thing. It's super long. And I mean, I wrote out that equation probably 300 times, like not 300, like thousands of times by the time it was my fourth year of my PhD. And so, but then I was like, yeah, what, are the photons created at the beginning of the crystal or the end of the crystal after the light passes through? Because the crystal has a dispersion, so that will change the bandwidth of the photons coming out, which made me think about the bandwidth of the photon going in, and made me check something with what we call the pump. And it fixed my experiment. And then I became a doctor. Cool. So it was a fun, some playful dance that I didn't think anything would come out of it. Yeah.
Well, the dance caused you to have a powerful visualization of the science.
Yeah. And it was like, wow, actually that part of it is really missing in the way science is taught now. Or the way I think, went about learning science. Was it was very much learning the equations, figuring out what the pattern was, and then just passing the exam, doing well on the exam. But then the next day, conceptually, because I hadn't really processed it, I would forget it, like, I was like, meh. Like, I just don't know.
There's a lot of, like, retention-based learning, but not enough actual conceptual, for the most part. Like, conceptual as in, like, visionary kind of thing.
Yeah, that using the imagination and really questioning and seeing, can we think about this in a better way?
It was interesting. I didn't finish the full question there because I was like, okay, it's good right there. Well, I was just saying perhaps the flow of electrons or photons bouncing on mirrors. Like, that's how I was going to finish the question. I was like, I think the first part was good enough. I was like,
sorry, did I interrupt you? I didn't mean to.
No, you did not. I purposely left it out because I was like, okay, I'll let her say it. But I was like, that's literally what I was thinking. Like, yeah, photons. Like,
photons. And I did one with electrons, like, based off the double slit experiment called duality. There was this opportunity to work with a filmmaker, and we had a week to create it. And so we created it using Feynman's voice, called Duality. And then
that's cool.
Oh God, it's gonna kill me.
I swear I saw that one.
Remember.
I know I saw the PhD dance-off one, but like I'm pretty sure I saw that one too.
But then this DJ like reached out to me and the filmmaker, being like, being like, can I use this footage for my new track? We're like,
Oh.
yeah. Oh yeah, it's on YouTube. Just look up duality and his will probably come up before. It's the exact same footage of the one with To the Feynman voice, but
That's awesome, though. In your auditions for The Nutcracker and Swan Lake, you mentioned in Vogue that it was literally blood, sweat, and tears to rise to the occasion. We were touching on that earlier, too. Grit is a powerful virtue, the feeling of failure, even after giving it 100%, yet still having the brilliant audacity to keep going. And so, do you have any particular stories of that feeling?
I think the grit, it's going through the physical thresholds of it, but definitely the emotional. And I would say the hardest emotionally was, training, starting at 13 and training hard. And then especially college, like full on physics load and trying to be at a professional level dance-wise for the first time. I was not at parties. I was full on 24/7. Every minute of my day was work. Like, I think for Harvard, one of the more intense kids at Harvard, which
Yeah.
is
That's saying something. Like,
yeah, I'm like, oh God, I was that kid. I think in my whole time at college, I went to 4 parties, and 2 of them I brought my computer, and I was like that kid. So, but it was going to that level of extreme where I'm tired, I'm physically beat, mentally beat, and I'm pushing hard, and not knowing if it's going to work out, right? Not knowing, and more than that, like not also thinking, am I working this hard? Am I shooting myself in the foot by trying to pursue 2 things? Am I going so hard, like that I won't make it in dance or physics? And like, am I eliminating both those options because I'm pursuing both? Whereas I might have been able to pursue one or the other if I just concentrated on that, or neither. But it's that gamble and pushing hard for not just like, oh, I'm going to push hard for like 2 weeks and I have a New Year's resolution, let's try it for a year. It's like years, plural, and everyone's saying it's not possible. And there's that little bit, that 5% that's like,
it's so frustrating because
what if?
it is.
What if?
Yeah.
That's the grit of like not knowing if it's possible, waking up every day and still giving 1,000%. That one's the hard one.
Yeah, well, it's a level of like you knew that it was possible deep down, and you've pushed past it because of that. I think part of the issue was the societal norm of just being a specialist. We're constantly pushed to just do one thing, and from a young age, I fought against it, and from a young age here, it seems like you fought against it as well. Maybe more towards the college years, but still chose to do more. And we're seeing a rise of more generalists. But even throughout history, we've had people like us who do more than just one thing, but for the past 100 years or so, we've been confined by society, that social construct. And it, like, your example, I think, is a perfect example of understanding, like, hey, you felt like you needed to do both of these things, but society kept pushing you back, like, don't do it. And then now you're proof that it can be done. And we're seeing, too, like, with nanotechnology and biotechnology, like, there's 2 specialties coming together. Those are kind of an example, but yours is another one, Ballerina and physicist. And it's like, that's, yeah. I'm going to end my thought there, but I think that's important.
It's interesting. I think there's this belief that to become excellent at something, you've had to just do one. And I think the new sort of option I'm wanting to put out there is you can still be excellent, but I think it's hard to define, it doesn't have to look in the categories that it has been in. It's like English or science, or, it's like, the world now doesn't exist like it did. It's a lot more blended.
It really is, though. And you also mentioned that after you graduated your PhD, that you wanted to incorporate your physics and dance united into one journey. So how has that interdisciplinary life been for you?
Well, yeah. So when I graduated from PhD, I really felt like I had just done the training. So it was interesting. I think I was getting some recognition for having pursued both, but in my head I was like, I've just done training. I don't know, like I've done college and PhD and then dance companies, but like I haven't. I think for me, like I've wanted to fuse it together and do more than the training. And so the first 2 years out of PhD, were tough. Like that was tough too. We're not, I was definitely doing my own path and track, and definitely encouraged to do a standard, like a job that most people would,
like fall back to.
Yeah, like a consistent like salary and all the things that people are used to. But I just couldn't do that. And so I was exploring, and now this year, especially like during this COVID time, it's been like, I think I'm starting to figure out how to fuse it together, because I think often science and art are fused together, but it lowers the standard, like in order to make it fit. What I found incredibly important is like, how can I fuse it together to enhance both, to make it better? To increase the excellence of it, and make sure that I'm not lowering the excellence.
Yeah. Someone mentioned to me at one point that I've mentioned on this show a few times, this idea of like knowledge trenches. So a lot of specialists have one, polymaths have three or more, and people who are generalists are kind of dabbling in between those two. And it's interesting how when you have more than one trench, the solution you're looking for, especially if you only have one trench, you might be a physicist, but you are only in that one trench. You're only looking at the point of view, that problem, from your point of view of a physicist, a scientist. But from having dual that way, you might find your solution, the innovation you need, from looking from the other trait's perspective and finding that cross-pollination, so to speak. And that's what causes the excellence in both.
Or a different way, and a different way of asking some questions, I think, which then lead to breakthroughs.
Yeah, it reminds me of like a polymathic mindset. So something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
I think there's so many ways to define it.
But how do you feel about it?
I would say like an openness, an eagerness, a curiosity, and a determination and passion to pursue different fields, and but not just curiosity, but actually putting in the work of understanding the different fields, because I think inevitably that creates connections. Like I think creativity is connecting various dots on a page. So if you're given a page and you only know dots in science sector, you're limited to that. But if you know dots in science and philosophy and art and music, you can then cross over and make a lot more connections, and your creativity web is a lot bigger.
It's interesting. It makes me think of Steve Jobs' quotes, like, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only by looking back. And I took that whole mindset and like kind of flipped it around. Like, I think that if you prepare yourself, you can connect the dots looking forward by setting in place the certain placements that you want to do. I think that's a key to polymathy as well, is that you have to kind of put these stepping stones towards the areas that you want. Like you did your college, as well as doing your training. You would leave the lab to go take a break and start doing the stretches in the hallway. Like you were setting the dots in place to do so. And so it's this interesting thought that like you can do both. It's better to plan it if you do more than one.
Yeah, and put in the work.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I feel like there's so much more that I could know about and learn. And I know, like, I have a friend who's deep into economics, and so he'll send me something. I'm like, I should learn more about economics, and I don't know enough about government. Like there's all these things I don't know. I
bought this book to try to learn more, and then I just never ended up reading it.
There are various books and links to videos that
Well, I feel like economics in particular would be an interesting way for you, because you'll be able to find how your physics can actually be spread out more to other people. You know what I mean? As a content creator, you're already creating content, spreading your knowledge, but that's one way. That's the economic of content marketing, essentially. And so it's like it's interesting to think about like how economics can be put into many different areas.
Yeah.
So some would say your path is unconventional, but to me it seems like the perfect course for you. My principle in life is balance, often between science and philosophy. So what are some of your principles in life? Or principle, if you have this one.
So you're saying like your principle is balance?
I often try to find a way to balance things as much as possible. And sometimes I just don't even do it consciously. It just happens where I'm like, it's almost OCD level. Like I had to make sure it's balanced in this way or a certain form. But I think that between science and philosophy especially has become prevalent in my life. And so I think for you especially too, it has.
Balance for sure has been the hardest thing. I feel like I yin yang, like I'm just like catapulted from one extreme to the other. Like I would say I'm not the most balanced human. Like in terms of like, I go deep into certain things. Like I just like deep, and I ignore everything else. And then I'll go deep into something else. And so overall, I think it ends up being balanced, but the day-to-day is not very balanced. I think
balance is a perspective too.
Yeah, I think it's doing what you love and like what you're super excited about and passionate about, and like that's just what's driven me. And of course, there's times when it's really hard. But it's like that overall passion that just like pushes me through it. I don't know if that really answers your question at all.
You did fantastic, don't worry. It's interesting too because it makes me think of the state of flow where you're in that optimal state of focus, which is kind of a minimal way of explaining that state, but all the neurochemicals are coming into play and you just have the frontal cortex is shut down, hyperfrontality, and so you're just in a state of pure almost zen in a way, focusing on the task. And I feel it seems like to me that when you've gotten purely focused into ballet or purely focused into science, that you were able to get into that state. And so you were balanced. You were focused on what you cared about, and that's what really mattered.
Thanks for then saying I'm balanced. But I think it's so difficult to get in that flow. So I will purposely, and it's tricky though. It's incredibly tricky. Of like I will ignore emails and messages and until like if there's a task I need to get done and there's a focus, like I'm just ignoring everything until I get to that, which then means for the next 5 days I'm sending emails being like, sorry, I'm for the delayed replies, I have a delayed reply, I'm sorry, so sorry in advance to everyone. Oh, Dustin.
No, you're good.
The funny thing is, yes, you have experienced the Merritt
delay.
Merritt delay and ignoring. I will ignore social media. I will ignore emails. I just can't. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of that is too just like the introversion a little bit as well. But like I'm fine with it. I think that there's a level of determination from the host. Like if you're busy, you're busy. Like I understood it. You're over across the seas and you're doing all kinds of stuff. You're in the Polymath Festival. You're doing all these interviews. Like I've seen you do interviews in between the time where I started messaging to you and then talk to you now. And so it's like you're super busy. I totally understand.
So like your persistence has been endearing and very like,
yes, and it's been worth it.
I mean, but it's also very appreciated because I think, it's hard to be like, I'm sorry, like I promised this 3 months ago, or like that I'm trying to get this thing done, but I end up being 8 hours at my computer having done no work towards that, that goal that I'm really striving for. So,
yeah. Oh, that hit me a little too close to home there because I was like, I've been trying so hard to get these interviews out. Because, like I said at the beginning before our call, you're number 87. I started last May.
Oh, wow.
And I tried to get one out every week for consistency's sake, and I did, but by the time I got to November, I was on number like 25. I had recorded like 60. And so like I was like, I'm behind. I'm in danger, like as the meme says. But like at one point, I was like, okay, screw it. Even though the winter is my worst time of year, like this the seasonal affective thing, I decided I'm going to do a polycast a day, or close to it at the very least. And I got 35 episodes out, like towards the end of the year. I've also been kind of swamped with all these different interviews I've been doing this year. So it's like, I feel like I'm not making progress, but I know that I am. And I know that you probably felt that same way. Like, you're doing that Kaizen method where you're just doing a little bit every day. And it feels like you're not making much progress, but over time, it does compound.
And it does. I'm a huge believer. All the work that feels, when you're in it, you don't feel the improvement. But I swear all the work does pay off in the end. And it's just like sticking it through. So yeah, Dustin, like for sure, like for anyone putting in that, hard of a work, it's like, don't worry. It's, it pays off like in ways that you don't even imagine. It's like the number of things where I've like pushed for auditions and just like not gotten it. And then like something will pop up like 10 days later, and I'm like, well, good thing I was prepared. And then I get that. Or like, it's like, you're like, oh, actually, good thing I didn't get that dance gig, because now I can do the astronauts thing. It's like, whereas a little bit being like, oh, bummer, like I really wanted that dance thing. I was like, in comparison now, forget it.
Well, it's interesting because like it's a level of being opportunist as well, like just being open to the opportunity. Like literally the first interview I had, the matchmaker tool that I mentioned before the show, it was made by my podcast host, PolyCast host, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And literally just a couple of days later, actually, I started talking to somebody and had him on the show. And it just landed on me randomly at one point. I was like, okay, let's start doing this. And then I started doing interviews. And it's just one of those things, too, for you, I think that starting having that opportunist mindset, like it's been built in for you. You're just like, I want to do this opportunity. I want to do this. It's awesome. Considering the Polymath ethos on this show, it would be a mischance for me not to ask about the side art party and poolside Polymath. So what started all that?
So that happened during lockdown and all these quarantines. I think there is a lack of hope and lack of motivation around, and particularly amongst the social media following. So I wanted to do something fun, well, then this is an opportunity to meet other people who are interested in science and art, either science or art or both, right? And create these events where we can all come together. And the event was, I was like, I could probably get like 40 people on board for this event, and we'll make it a party. And like, we'll make it a Zoom party. And in the first day, like 240 people signed up. And then by the second day, 400. Yeah, I was like, where are all these science artists coming from? Like, what is this? And we had an event, and then astronaut Chris Hadfield agreed to join, and he serenaded us. And then we had Neil deGrasse Tyson come for the next one. And after that, it was just such an amazing group. And people were emailing and messaging, being like, can I be part of the team? And so we have a SciArt team, which does like in charge of Instagram. We have a group doing Instagram and Twitter and creating the events. And then we had a podcast team, and we now are the Poolside Polymath podcast. And it's a team of like, I think majority are PhDs in math and music and physics, and we all get together once a week and have a chat about what's going to be the next podcast. And we've got this amazing person, director Matt, who's editing and getting it all together, and Patricia, who make sure we all do our homework. And
homework is very important.
Which we've ended up getting on calls because it's 3 of us, and we'll start the podcast and we'll talk through it and be like, yeah, this one we're scratching the whole thing, like we did not do our homework, and okay, next week we are recording again.
Well, it's interesting too, because you might even keep those other ones around just in case you ever have like a sideshow. Like here's the blooper reels, or like here's the episodes that weren't.
Matt likes to put the bloopers at the end of each, like right at the end. I didn't realize, because it goes into this set thing of we have a set spoken section about the social media accounts, etc. And then at the end, it'll be like bloopers and. I didn't realize. And then I was like, Matt!
I should do that. I should do that too, especially for this episode, especially because like we're probably gonna have a lot of bloopers. I feel like it's interesting.
I mean, most of the bloopers are me. I'm constantly like, what?
Well, I love the energy though, so I'll probably keep most of it in. But it's interesting because first off, Poolside Polymath. I saw the image just randomly one day, I think on like Instagram, and I'm like, hold up. This like Polymath is like my niche, if you will. So like I have to keep an eye on this just in the first place. And then when I checked it, I was like, okay, this is awesome. I'm gonna follow it just on pure merit, I guess you could say. And then on top of that too, the poolside. Like I was a lifeguard for many years. I teach swimming for almost a better half of a decade, and it's like that now. I'm really like excited.
Well, let's collaborate. I don't know how podcasts collaborate, but let's would love to have you on and.
Perfect.
Share your knowledge.
That sounds good to me. We'll talk about it after the show too. Yeah. And I think it also makes me think of the Da Vinci Festival. So what was that like?
Oh, that was amazing. So Wakas, who wrote this amazing book called Polymath. I think it's taken him 8 years to write this amazing book. But he organized the Da Vinci Festival with, the V&A Museum and all these others. So they had really incredible panels and discussions. It opened my eyes to like all these incredible people that I had never, I didn't know about. Like this whole world feels kind of new to me. So it was just a really fascinating, because I've jumped from like one super extreme niche to the other niche without really spending time in the middle of like with the people who do both. Because I was either with a physicist or with the ballet dancers. And so this was like cool. Yeah. It was amazing.
Well, from my perspective too, I think there's a super exciting opportunity here for like the next 10 years. We're touching on the whole idea of you want to become an astronaut, that kind of thing, which we'll touch on a bit later too, I feel like. But there's also this idea of just like the whole pathway of you combining them, like the uniting of both of these niches together. I think that's a super exciting pathway as well.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it goes.
So your YouTube channel is growing, and it seems like you have a lot of great videos on there with bomb soundtracks. Where do you see that evolving?
Yeah, well, I think most of the robot videos are on Instagram, and that's been really fun. Well, it was interesting because I just had this I was like, this is a kooky idea, but I'm going with it. Dancing with the robot and kind of doing like TikTok version dances with the robot. And they kind of took off, like millions of views, sometimes like 14 million views or wherever. And it was just me and the robot by myself, and doing it for doing it for a couple months, like no revenue, just waking up, going to the studio and working on it and doing it and producing a video. Like each 15-second video would take me probably 7 to 8 hours. So it was like a full on, it was tough. Yeah. And just I was like, look, we're in quarantine, we're in lockdown. Like, I don't know, like all my gigs have been canceled. We're going to do this. And now what's been really great is like getting, it's been invited and wanted to be included in campaigns, and it's now getting funded, and I'm like, I'm paid to do something that I really like to do.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, and it seems like the best content is some of the ones that if you spend that much time on content, it's going to end up being really good. And I've seen a lot of your videos. One of them on TikTok, I still keep thinking about like it was you in a hat. It was I think one of your latest videos where you're just like kind of moving the hat back and forth. I don't know why, but that particular video really shows your philosophy. I feel like a great deal. I was like, when I first saw it, I was like, I love this video.
That one was a fun, and it's hard because sometimes I'll put in just as many hours in like a video like that versus another one, and just sometimes it doesn't work. It's like experiments, and you're like, oh well.
Well, don't look at the metrics on there. TikTok is weird when it comes to that.
No, but it's also fascinating in terms of, but it's also kind of a social experiment, being like, oh yeah, what reads and what doesn't read, and what do people connect with, and I love that part of it.
Yeah, part of it is too, like if you take too long in between posts, you might get kind of, not shadow banned per se, but pushed down. And so sometimes it takes a few posts to get back onto the For You page. So even if you did a really great video, it might not get shown to people because of just the lack of consistency in that way. Like I was told to do, not told, but Gary Vee talks about doing a ton of content every day. And even a year or two ago when I was on TikTok, I was thinking I need to be doing 10 videos a day in order to get that progress. And like, that's a lot. And making sure those are quality videos too is even more so.
No, that's not how,
I wanted to ask you.
Good luck if I do a post a week.
Yeah. How is Barshinabad doing nowadays?
We're struggling. He is stuck we're trying to get him into Dubai. But right now he needs like customs, and I'm not surprised if they'll ask for a passport and a visa. Like they're being so complicated. But his base arrived today. The robot Barshinabad's base arrived today. So we are going to do a couple more dances, practicing dances.
That's cool. At least you have a little bit of progress there. What software tech do you use to be creative with the robotic arm? Like, how do you make the dances?
So it comes with a it looks like a iPad. I mean, bulkier, but yeah, and it comes with software incorporated with the robot, and there are various ways of doing it. One is you can do it directly from the iPad of like the coordinates and the degrees of the rotation and the position of the arms in each joint. There's 6 joints. Or you can like move the robot in a certain position and save that location and then move it to another location. And then you can adjust the velocity or the speed that it gets to a location. And what's fun is playing around. There's auxiliary robotic, I would say, machinery that and software that I'm now getting sent to play around with. So it's a fun way to learn about robotics.
Yeah, well, it's like getting different angles and then going like in that last little bit there. It makes me think of just like, I don't know, as the gamer in me, it makes me think what is out there that might not be available to the scientists that might be able to make it easier for you, like maybe VR headsets or something like that. How did it feel to be in the collection of 100 Tales of Extraordinary Women?
So this one, I don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, I don't remember where I found that, but I think there was a certain blog post that was actually just talking, or I found some kind of like extraordinary woman. I'll look it up and send it to you.
Okay.
How about that? How has your journey of becoming an astronaut been going?
Oh man, so started my piloting license, getting my piloting license, and have applied for NASA, and there are delays due to COVID. If I were NASA, I wouldn't accept me yet. And I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but just because, as I said, like I've done the training of physics and dance, but right now, why I'm dancing with the robots is to become more expert at robotics and AI, and I don't feel like I'm an expert quite yet. So wanting to gain more of that expertise, and right now it's through a playful way of like creating dance videos. The other strategy, which is I don't know how to get on his radar, but so this guy named Yusaku from Japan, the billionaire, has invited for 8 artists to apply to go around the moon.
Yeah, I think I heard about that.
I don't think I'm big enough to get on his radar. I'm like, dancing dork.
Yeah,
really wants to be an astronaut.
Well,
really
you're going
wants
viral.
to
You can do it.
I don't know how to do that.
Is it just artists or just in general too? Because I thought, isn't he talking about like people in general who can like prove themselves worthy?
Last I saw it was artists, but
Okay.
yeah, I'm sure.
Why the moonshot goal? Literally.
I think since a young age, I've always been an adventurer. I've always been a traveler. I've gone and wandered around on my own all over the place. And then that combination of is like physics and, needing to have that physical background as well. And going to the moon, like.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
I just like, why not? Who could say no?
Well, last thing before we wrap here,
Yeah.
what's next for you?
Next for me is it's a little confidential.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll keep
Well,
it a secret there.
it's working with Barishnabot
Oh, okay.
and working on a piece, and we're flying to who knows
Okay.
where to go. Yes, so this year will be exciting for Barishnabot and I hope. We'll see.
That's all you can say, basically. But
That's
yeah.
all I can say.
I wonder if you
Stay
could do like
tuned.
zero gravity with Cernobot. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. It just needs to be attached to a wall.
Yeah. You'd be flying around, but fly
I mean,
around with you.
but it can float around too.
Well, you have a great personal brand, Physics on Pointe, but where can people find you online?
Thank you. So Physics on Pointe with an E at the end on Instagram and Twitter, and website, it's physicsonpoint.com, and LinkedIn, Merritt Moore.
Well, and then what could be a call to action for the audience today?
Yeah, I would say like have a good thing, like take an hour to go walk around and really think like what are some goals that would get you like super excited, like really, really excited, like some things that you envision yourself doing and becoming and being, and what would you need to do to get there, And I think for a little motivation is thinking about like, how's that helpful for other people? How's your goal helpful for other people? Like, how will that inspire and give hope, and motivate other people? But then taking that being, and working backwards, being like, okay, so then in order to get there today, I need to, walk in a certain way, act in a certain way, be a certain way. Yeah. Because as my added, the Romanian teacher, she would say like, Merritt, if you want to be a professional ballet dancer, she was like, you can't just be in the studio. Like, she's like, when you're on the bus, and then she'd be like, posture up, she's like, then you're a professional dancer inside the studio and outside the studio, right? So I think it's that mentality of, if you have that goal for something, be it, embody it now, embody it when you're like, going to Starbucks, embody what that is when you're at the grocery store. Just
I love that. And it kind of makes me think of the ikigai, which is a question I had to skip over earlier, but you were talking about just kind of engrossing yourself into that ikigai. And I also forgot to mention that I'll have links in the description for people to check you out for sure. And once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Thank you so much for coming on. And Dr. Merritt, more on the Polymath PolyCast.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Really appreciate it.